Hello, in this video I'm going to show you the best settings for shooting movies with the Canon Rebel T7 or EOS 2000D. Hello and welcome to this CameraWize video on shooting movies with the Canon Rebel T7 or EOS 2000D. Now the important thing to know about this camera is it is an excellent camera for shooting both stills and video. But it is important to get the settings right so that you can get the best out of the camera and produce the best videos possible. So the first thing you need to do when you're going to shoot video is to move down to the icon on the dial mode that is the video camera. And that's because this is the only way that you can get into the video modes, and in fact the only way that you can shoot video is by moving that dial down. And when you do that, you may hear as we get down to it that the mirror inside the camera pops up. So if I just do that now, there, like that. And what that does is it enables the live view screen at the back of the camera. Now this is the only way that you can shoot video. You can't look through the viewfinder here and shoot video because you don't actually see an image through the viewfinder. You only see it through the live view screen at the back. So that's the first thing to do. But also, when you move it down to the video mode here, it gives you the video menu tabs when you press the menu button. So if I press that, it shows that you have 4 video tabs which are specifically for shooting video. The first thing you do when you're in those tabs is you decide upon your video system. Now this is not as important as it used to be. The video systems refer to the kind of systems which televisions used in different countries. So for example, in Europe predominantly, the system was called PAL, P-A-L, and in the United States predominantly it was NTSC. Now of course those were days when before digital TV, and those systems to some extent are not as prevalent as they once were. It is important really to get them right for your national and geographic area, and there are reasons for that, which I won't go into now, but I do go into in the manual. But for this instance, it's just worth getting it right so that if you're in the States, you click on NTSC, and if you're in Europe and most other parts of the world, you go on to PAL. It does change one thing, which is frame rate, which we'll look at in a moment. So here I go into Video tab 2, and right at the bottom is Video System. And if I open that up by pressing Set, then you will see that you only have 2 options, as I say, NTSC or PAL. And as I'm in Europe, I click on PAL. After setting the video system, the next thing you need to look at is video frame rate and size. Now this camera is pretty good. It will shoot 1080 at 30 or 25 frames per second, and it will shoot 720 at 60 or 50 frames per second. Now 1080 is full HD and 720 is standard HD, and both are perfectly good for social media and even for showing on reasonably large screens. The quality is excellent. But when I talked about video system, this is what I mean as how it changes the frame rate. So if we go into Video tab 2 and look at the very top one at movie recording size, then I have, because I'm in PAL, 920 times 1080 at 25 frames per second, 920 1080 at 24 frames per second, which is established as the film version, the film speed for cinematic videography. And then 1280 by 720 at 50, and then 640 by 480 at 25. Now the 640 by 480 I wouldn't bother with at all. It's so poor it's not worth looking at. But I would look at the 1080 25 and the 720 50. 25 frames a second is about the speed at which the human eye can detect movement, and so that's the standard. 25 frames per second is reasonable quality video in terms of how the video will look. 50 frames a second looks a little bit smoother, and there are reasons for shooting at a smoother rate. But also for shooting 50 frames per second, it means that you can use slow motion much more effectively. So if you shoot at 50 frames a second, you can slow it down by half and still be on 25 frames per second, or by quarter down to 12 frames per second, and the eye will still detect that as slow motion video. So 50 frames a second is actually pretty good if you want to be creative and inventive with your film production. Now, because I'm on PAL, as I say, I'm on 25 frames and 50 frames per second. If you chose NTSC, then the options you would have would be 30 frames a second and 60 frames a second. And that's the only difference really when you set the video systems. They're the frame rates that change, and they're really the only changes that there are. But it's a good idea, I would say, to shoot 1080-25 because you get the better frame quality if that's what you're looking for, or if you're looking for a certain smoothness, or you want to do slow motion videography, then shoot at 50 frames per second. And so now the third thing you need to look at is movie exposure. When you're shooting stills, you have an enormous choice here for the exposure settings and the types of stills that you're going to shoot. So you go from manual, which doesn't set the exposure at all, you're responsible for exposure, through the semi-automatic and then the completely automatic settings here, where the camera dictates the exposure. It decides what the exposure should be and then sets the parameters accordingly. When you're shooting video, you basically have only two choices. You have either automatic or you have manual. Now, there's no automatic with flash for video because the flash does literally that. It just flashes. And what you want for video is a constant light. So the flash doesn't work when you're trying to shoot video. So you have just auto and just manual. Where you'd make that choice is in Video tab 1 at the top, which is movie exposure. And if you look here, then obviously, as I say, you have either auto or you have manual. Now, if you choose auto, this camera will take actually very good video. It will decide the settings that are essentially the same as stills. There'll be ISO, there'll be shutter speed, and there'll be aperture, and the camera will produce very well exposed video. But if you want to be a little more creative, a little more inventive, then you can choose manual. And let's have a look at that now. So having chosen manual, I now come out of the menu setting and I can see on the back of the screen the video. Not that I'm shooting video, but I can see what the video would be shooting if it was switched on. And this allows me here to change the various settings, the parameters that I might want to change either before I shoot the video or when I'm shooting the video. As with stills, the parameters, or the main ones, are ISO, aperture, and shutter speed. And those are the parameters that are along the bottom that I can change, as I say, either before I shoot the video or when the video is on. So let's just press the button here that switches the video on, so I'm now recording. And if I turn the rotate dial, which is on the top of the camera, then below at the bottom you will see the three options which I have, which are shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. If I turn the rotate dial on its own, then I can affect the shutter speed, and as it goes up or down, you can see live on the back screen how that affects the exposure. If I want to change the aperture, then I press the AV button on the back of the camera and then rotate the dial, and I can change the aperture live again, and as you can see, it changes the exposure live, so I can see what it looks like. And finally, if I want to change the ISO, then I press the flash button on the top of the camera and rotate the dial, and that allows me to change the ISO again as I am recording live. And these are really good ways of being able to change the parameters whilst you're recording so that you can be creative and inventive, or if necessary, consistent to get the right look for your video as you're shooting live on this camera. Okay, the next thing you need to think about when you're shooting videos with this camera is sound. And sound can be a real problem for photographers who want to shoot videos because it's something they've never had to consider before. You very rarely find that silence is in fact silent. There's always some ambient noise or ambient sound. And it's your choice as the videographer as to whether you want to pick that up in the video or whether you want to avoid any ambient noise or outside sound. So deciding on how you record sound is very important. Now, if we go into the menus again and go to video tab 2, then just below movie recording size, you have sound recording. And if you click on there, you have 3 options. The first option is disable. Now, I don't recommend that you disable sound entirely, even if you've decided that you're not going to have any of the sound from the video in your final edit. And the reason for that is that sound is actually a really good signifier and a really good way of identifying pieces of video, because whilst the videos, if you shoot and reshoot and shoot again, may all look very similar, the conversations around that video will all be different, and it will help you actually identify the right piece of video if you have the sound with it. So the other 2 choices are either auto or manual. Now, this has an internal microphone. It doesn't have an external microphone socket on the Rebel T7, and so it's the internal microphone that we're talking about when we're talking about auto or manual sound recording. And the auto recording on this camera is actually pretty good. The downside of it is that because it's automatic and it doesn't know what sound you are particularly trying to record, it will pick up a lot of ambient sound. Now, if you are shooting something which has ambient sound in it, then that's not a problem. But if you just want to pick up some specific sound, like somebody talking, then auto may not be the right setting for you. In which case, you want to come down to manual. Now, manual setting allows you to set the sound recording level so that the sound that you're trying to record is the sound that this camera picks up. And the way it does that, if you look along the bottom bar here, which is the recording levels bar, then you will see that there is a 12 on it between -40 and 0. And this is -12. And the objective here, when you are recording the sound or listening to the sound that you want to record, is that the peak noise, the loudest sound level for this, hits 12. Because if it goes above 12, then the sound level can distort and can clip. But if you make sure that when you set it, that the loudest level is at -12, then the camera will enable the sound recording to be as crisp and as clean as it can be. And so you need to decide whether to set manual or whether to set auto. As I say, auto is pretty good, but if you know precisely what you want to record, then manual is that much better. Okay, so the next thing you may want to look at is the autofocus method. Now, the Canon T7 has 2 autofocus methods. If you're looking through the viewfinder, then the AF method and system here is very quick and very sharp. If you're looking through live view, then it's a little bit slower, but you do get some choices, and we can look at them here. So, if you look on menu, then if you look at video tab 1 and down to AF method, then you can see the choices that you have here. You have 3 choices. You have FlexiZone, Live Mode and Quick Mode. Now, FlexiZone is the same as single AF method through the viewfinder, which means that if you press the shutter button halfway down, then the camera will focus. And the good thing about this is that you can be shooting live video and you can do that and it will still focus, which is pretty good. The next one down from that is called Live Mode. And the advantage of that is that it has facial recognition within it, which means that if you're videoing people, then it will automatically try to focus on one of the faces that is in the frame. And that's pretty good and pretty useful. But again, in order to do so, you need to press the shutter button. The third one is Quick Mode. Now, this doesn't really work as well, though it's designed to. It's called Quick Mode because what it does is it comes out of video mode, goes into the viewfinder mode, focuses, and then bounces back into video mode again. So evidently you can't shoot video and use Quick Mode at the same time. So it's not really as useful for videoing as one might think. Although it may be slightly quicker, it does stop the videoing process and it does mean that you have to restart the video again. But I would use FlexiZone for pretty much everything, because even if you have faces in the frame, it's up to you to decide what you want to focus on. You may want to focus on the face, you may want to focus on something else. And if when you're in live mode there are no faces, then it does revert to flexi zone anyway. But those are the AF options that you have in live view, and the AF options you have for shooting video. The next thing you might want to look at is picture style. Now, if you've shot stills with this camera already, you may well be aware of the option for picture styles, and these can increase the contrast, they can boost saturation and make your images more punchy and more vivid, or they can desaturate your images, and in one case, one option is to make your picture entirely monochrome. Well, the same options apply for video, and you might be inclined, as you perhaps do with your picture styles for still, is to leave it on auto, but I would recommend that you actually change that to neutral. So if we go into the menus and into Video tab 3, at the bottom of that you will see the option for picture style, and you will also see that it has all the same options as you have for stills. So at the top it has auto and then standard and portrait, etc. And as I say, I would choose neutral. And the reason for that is that when you're shooting video, you want a flat video. You want it as flat as possible, with no oversaturation, no over contrast, nothing that will actually make editing that video more difficult. You can add saturation when you're editing. You can add contrast when you're editing, but you can't really take out those things very easily, certainly not as easily as when you're using stills, because you're dealing with large amounts of information and 25 or 50 frames per second. So the objective really is to produce really flat video and then add your style when you're producing your video in the edit. And finally, the thing I always look at when I'm shooting my videos is white balance. Now, if you're shooting in a single location, you might be happy just to leave it on auto. And the auto white balance on this camera is very good, and there's no reason really to want to change it. But if you're shooting in different locations where the lighting might be slightly different, and the color contrast and the color tones might be slightly different, then it's recommended really to set the white balance at every location. And the reason for that is you want a continuity through your video so that you don't move from one location to another and the lighting looks completely different. The option to change your custom white balance is in menus, and if you go to the shooting tab 3, then just above picture style you can click on that and get the option to change white balance. It's not very difficult, it's fairly straightforward. If you buy the manual, then I'll show you exactly how to do it. But I would recommend, as I say, if you're changing location frequently when you're shooting video, to change that white balance and set that white balance on every occasion when you change location. If you want to know more, then why not take a look at our manual, which has been specially written for this camera. In fact, we're giving away a sample of our manual absolutely free. It contains 2 full course videos, including the full video on shooting movies with the Rebel T7. All you have to do is click on the link here or in the description below, and we'll send it to you straight away, absolutely free.